Hi, welcome to this lecture. In our previous lecture, lecture 7, we discussed about metadata standard. And one of the things that we came to understand that there are there are several standards that are set, and depending on uh, who you are, where you are, you might decide to choose a standard. However, there is uh, there is a decision at every point in time you have to make, and that is deciding which metadata standard to choose. So when selecting metadata standard, you you sometimes get into the crossroad of deciding which metadata standard to use. Not because you don't know that, for instance, ISO metadata is the one you need to pick, or probably the local defined metadata in your region is the one to pick. But sometimes just because of the metadata collection type you are using, and then sometimes the data type you are trying to create the metadata for also limits you in choosing what metadata you need to. So for instance, in our previous lecture, we learned about the ISO 191115 series metadata, and then we also learned about the FGDC metadata. And FGDC design metadata is quite common, and you can find them in many of the softwares. So for instance, if you want to choose a metadata and you want to choose an ISO metadata, the question would come, does your metadata tool, the tool you are trying to use to create your metadata, does it support an ISO metadata transformation? If yes, then you have an option to choose ISO metadata. But if no, then you are only limited to what the tool allows you to use. And so at that point, you are limited. Another thing is that if your data is embedded in a database, databases or these applications also have an inbuilt metadata method or an inbuilt metadata format that it has. If your software or if your database does not have an ISO metadata format or does not support an ISO metadata format, then you are limited to whatever it has to give you. So sometimes you might have to choose based on the fact that your data storage or your data warehouse ecosystem does not support the metadata format that you want to choose. When you talk about the type of data, sometimes you would want to create metadata for vector data. Sometimes you want to create metadata for raster data. And there are times you want to create metadata for services or web mapping applications. And if you want to create this metadata, not every metadata standard usually have all the fields that you need or have the component that you will need to provide. So for instance, the CSDDM by the FGDC was typically developed to document GIS vector and raster data. The ISO 19115 series version 1 was actually fit for vector data more than raster data. And so it wasn't good enough for imagery. And that's why the ISO 19115 series 2 came, so that you can be able to document or provide a comprehensive metadata for raster dataset. ISO 1915 series 1 would do more for vector data, web mapping applications, and data catalog and probably data modeling applications. But ISO 19115 series 2 is fit for imagery or graded data, and you would need to make these decisions based on the data that you choose. So this is a very short um, lecture, and I want to end it by showing you an example of tools, metadata standard tools that you can use. So I have these are two open source metadata standard. However, one is coming from a commercial uh, vendor, and then another is coming from an open source vendor. The Geo Network open source offered by, or the Geo Portal server offered by Esri, is an open source metadata application that you can use to edit your metadata and publish your metadata. So kind of all in one. You can create, edit, and publish your metadata online. You can also use the CATS MD Edit version 5, and it's just basically for QGIS. So if you use QGIS, then you can use this also for documenting your metadata. I hope this lecture has been insightful, and you can try these tools out depending on which application you are familiar with, whether you are using open source or you are using Azure product. Even if you are not using any of them, you can still use the Azure GeoPortal server. And I hope that you get more information and more insight as you delve deeper into how the tools works. Until then, I will see you in the next lecture.